Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise and really get into the insights that matter. Today, well, we're tackling a quote that's really bounced around American history, hasn't it? John Quincy Adams. America does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy.
Yeah, it sounds pretty straightforward, almost like a guiding principle.
Exactly. But our mission today is to see how that holds up. In 2025, things are a bit more complicated now.
Definitely. And to help us unpack it, we've got two key sources. First, this really interesting 2025 remix analysis. It tries to bring Adams into our world, the world of tech and, well, modern power plays.
Okay.
And then we're jumping back to 2005. There was this fascinating debate on U.S. foreign policy. And honestly, almost 20 years later, it feels incredibly relevant.
Right. So the big question is, how does the U.S. deal with threats now? Is it still about hunting monsters? Or is the game totally different?
And what are the consequences? The unintended stuff that happens when you intervene.
Yeah, get ready for some potentially surprising facts, maybe some shifts in how you see things. So let's start with Adams himself.
Well, Adams's original idea, it came from a place of, let's say, non-interventionist exceptionalism. America should be the beacon, right? Safeguard its own freedom.
A champion of freedom everywhere, but the vindicator only of her own. That's the line.
Exactly. Lead by example, not by force. That was the early thinking, strong tradition back then.
But okay, fast forward to now. The 2025 remix source throws a wrench in that, doesn't it?
It really does. It argues Adams, well, he didn't know about 247 drone feeds, did he? Or think tanks churning out op-eds constantly, or these weaponized hashtags.
Weaponized hashtags, wow.
Yeah, using online narratives to shape opinion, justify action. It's a different world. The source says the moral high ground today isn't held by staying hung. It's occupied from 30,000 feet with a payload attached.
Woof. That paints a picture, a very different kind of monster hunt.
And that leads into this idea the source calls the monster machine.
Okay, tell me about that.
It's this concept where certain nations get cast as the permanent villain. Iran is the prime example given.
A perpetual monster.
Right. Chants like death to America are amplified, treated as imminent threats. But the source points out you hear death to Iran pretty loudly on our side, too, justifying strikes or sanctions. It's a feedback loop.
So if they're the monster, what does this source say we actually do about it? This is the surprising part.
Yeah, this is where it gets counterintuitive. The argument is America doesn't really destroy monsters anymore. We manage them.
Manage them.
Well, the source lays out a pretty cynical playbook. You fund the opposition, you poke them, provoke reactions, maybe take out a key general, slap on sanctions for essential things like, say, insulin.
Wow.
And then act surprised when they lash out.
Yeah.
The thinking is, why get rid of a useful enemy entirely?
That's quite a shift, managing threats instead of eliminating them. What's the payoff for that?
Oh, the utility is huge, according to this analysis. These managed monsters, they justify massive defense budgets. They dominate news cycles. They let presidents act unilaterally, bypass Congress sometimes. And maybe darkest of all, the source suggests they can be a handy excuse for a pre-election military strike if things aren't looking great domestically.
Like that cheating with your ex analogy the source used, a quick hit of attention.
Exactly. And speaking of strikes, the source brings up the June 2025 Trump strike on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Which felt like a real contradiction, given the whole no more endless wars Magier promise.
Totally. The source jumps right on it. Was it effective? Was it legal? Was it even necessary?
And this really loops back to Adams's core warning, doesn't it?
It does. He wasn't saying monsters aren't real. He was worried that hunting them is what changes you. It turns a republic, focused inward on its principles, into an empire. Always looking outward, always projecting force.
That idea, republic versus empire, it's a classic tension. And it wasn't just Adams worrying about it. Let's pivot to that 2005 Meet the Press debate. Sharansky and Buchanan. It's striking how much it resonates today.
It really is. Buchanan came out swinging against interventionism.
Yeah.
He basically said, look, 9/11 wasn't because they hate our freedoms or the Bill of Rights.
Okay, what was it then, according to him?
It was our presence there. U.S. military bases, political meddling in the Middle East. He specifically brought up bin Laden's fatwa, the grievance about infidels standing on the sacred soil of Saudi Arabia.
So intervention caused the backlash.
That was his argument. And he said trying to plant democracy everywhere, that's just, quote, a formula for permanent war.
And he brought up Adams directly here, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. He used Adams to say, look, stay out of the internal business of countries that aren't actually threatening us. Where in the Constitution, he asked, does it say we should be doing this?
But Sharansky had a completely different take. His book, A Case for Democracy.
Right. Sharansky's belief was fundamental. Freedom isn't American, it's universal. Everyone wants it, if they get a real choice.
So how did he square that with interventions?
His argument was nuanced. You can't impose freedom, he said. But you absolutely can impose dictatorship, or at least enable it, by propping up autocratic regimes.
Okay.
He used Reagan and the Soviet Union as his example. Stop supporting the dictatorships, he argued, and they might just collapse from within. No shots fired by the U.S.
Interesting contrast, but then the conversation took a turn with this analogy, democracy as an organ transplant.
Yeah, that's a sticky one.
Mm.
The idea is simple. Just like your body might reject a donated organ, a nation, its culture, its history, might reject a political system forced on it from outside, especially democracy.
Someone said it wasn't like transplanting a potato.
Exactly. A Russian defense minister, apparently. Democracy is not a potato that you can transplant from one kitchen garden to another.
Oh, okay.
The point being, if you do try to force democracy, you're basically signing up for lifelong anti-rejection medications. Constant interference, delivered forcibly under restraint, as the source puts it.
And the source suggests that maybe only authoritarianism can be successfully transplanted.
That's the provocative idea. Because maybe it requires less cultural buy-in initially. It's a grim thought.
It links to that point about culture, right? That stable governments usually grow out of their culture. They reflect it.
Precisely. Trying to fundamentally change a government without it aligning with deep cultural roots, it's often seen as offensive, and it's almost always incredibly costly. In lives, in treasure.
And history gives us warnings.
Plenty. Look at Russia after the USSR fell. The attempt to just impose a free market system. The source argues it led to chaos, mafia rule, massive inequality, even losing track of nuclear materials for a while.
Buchanan warned about this kind of blowback too, didn't he?
He did. He said, remember, we helped bring down the Shah in Iran and we got the Ayatollah? Wilson pushed his crusade for democracy after World War I, and what followed? Lenin, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler. Not exactly democratic utopia.
And this 2005 debate, we have to remember, was happening during the Iraq War.
Right. And the transcript reflects that. There were real concerns voiced then about training Iraqi forces, whether they were effective. Congressman Rangel was on, calling the war itself a fraud.
Not about elections, he said, but just to knock off Saddam Hussein.
And fought with other people's kids. That was his very pointed phrase.
Okay, let's jump back to 2025 and this idea of a soft empire. It sounds less about military might, more insidious.
That's the concept. It's an empire that doesn't plant flags on territory anymore. It plants frameworks.
Frameworks? Like what?
Think development agencies like USAID, financial institutions like the IMF, countless NGOs, even our cultural exports, movies, music, tech trends. They do the occupying now.
And the troops are who?
Influencers, consultants, tech startup guys, missionaries of a certain way of doing things. Democracy gets templated.
Templated, meaning?
Meaning there's a specific model, often Western-style liberal democracy and market economy. And if you deviate, if you resist...
You get punished. Sanctions, maybe covert sabotage?
Exactly. You get branded a rogue state. It's control, but it's often less visible, less obviously military.
And propaganda plays a huge role in maintaining this.
A massive role, according to the 2025 remix. It questions the standard narratives. Is Iran really the cartoon villain we see? How much terrorism blamed on them is, well, maybe black ops or just wrongly attributed?
That's a provocative question.
It is. And the source notes something worrying. In foreign policy, what feels true often beats actual facts. Narratives are powerful.
And the public's reaction. Or lack of reaction. The source had something chilling to say about that, too.
Yeah, the observation that the American public doesn't flinch anymore at those awful baby-in-the-rubble optics.
Why not?
The suggestion is stark. Empathy has been reverse-engineered into a weapon. We're manipulated, desensitized perhaps, to pave the way for certain actions.
So instead of sending soldiers...
We send storylines. You get humanitarian war, feminist drones, climate justice strikes, and they all come packaged with these, like, moral TED Talks to justify them.
Which brings us back to Trump, the 2025 strike, and that Magi promise. The outsider seemingly getting sucked into the machine.
Yeah, the unspoken bargain of no more foreign adventures gets betrayed. The source implies even someone trying to break the mold gets co-opted by this monster machine. Ending endless wars just becomes a talking point, maybe a one-off correction, not a real change in the system.
So, with all this happening, what about the checks and balances? Congress, the War Powers Act, are they working?
Well, theoretically, yes. The War Powers Resolution from '73. It says the president needs to tell Congress within 48 hours of using force, and they've only got 60 days without explicit congressional amicus. But the source says it's routinely ignored, just bypassed.
And Congress holds the purse strings, right? They could cut funding.
They could.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality, presidents tend to act first, then dare Congress to defund troops already in harm's way. And the source's blunt assessment, they never do.
This isn't new, though. Presidents have been doing this for a while.
Oh, yeah. Reagan, Obama, Trump. Remember the Soleimani strike in 2020? Biden hitting targets in Syria in 21 and 23, often without full prior congressional authorization.
It leaves us in this kind of permanent legal gray area.
Exactly. The president's power as commander-in-chief clashes with Congress's power to declare war. And that 2001 AUMF, the authorization for use of military force after 9/11, it's been stretched to cover conflicts way beyond its original scope.
So those common questions the source raises. Is bombing Iran an act of war?
Functionally.
Okay.
Pretty much, yeah. Legally, it gets spun as self-defense or containment. It's politically normalized.
And why doesn't Congress put a stop to it?
The source is cynical here. Because war is bipartisan, and opposing it sounds soft. That's the political calculation.
And global norms, the UN.
According to this analysis, the U.S. largely sets the norms and tends to ignore the UN when it's inconvenient.
Okay, let's use the remaining time to really zoom in on Israel and Palestine. This was a big focus in that 2005 debate, and it's like a microcosm of all these interventionist complexities.
It really is. You had Buchanan making that forceful argument again.
What?
Intervention is the cause of the terror.
How so in this specific case?
He pointed to Israel's invasion of Lebanon in the 80s, saying it directly led to the creation of Hezbollah. And he argued the Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. That's what fueled Hamas's rise and electoral success.
And he cited examples of withdrawal leading to peace.
Yeah. He mentioned the British, French, Russians pulling out of places and the conflicts ending afterward. His point, get out, and the fighting often stops.
But Sharansky, coming from a very different place.
Completely. He argued Israel only occupied those territories because it faced constant threats of being wiped out. And for Israel's own survival, he insisted, a democratic Palestinian state was the only long-term answer.
Because appeasing dictatorships
Only makes them stronger and more dangerous, in his view. You can't make deals with those who want to destroy you.
A really sharp point of disagreement was the right of return.
Huge disagreement. The question of whether Palestinians who left or were forced out in 1948 should be allowed back to homes now inside Israel? Sharansky was adamant that would mean no Jewish state anymore. For him, it was existential.
And Buchanan had that observation about Israel itself, calling it one of the most warlike countries, despite being a democracy.
Yeah, pointing to multiple wars, preemptive strikes. Sharansky's immediate counter was, again, perspective. Israel is under constant threat of total annihilation. They fight, he argued, simply for the right to exist.
It really boiled down to fundamental differences. Sharansky ended with that powerful statement.
Right. I am willing, I wish, I want, I insist to give the Palestinians all the rights in the world except the right to destroy me. And the only way to do it is to encourage democratic reforms and a merging of a democratic Palestinian state. A strong call for democracy first.
And Buchanan's reply was just incredibly blunt.
Just 2 words, basically. Justice can't wait. Meaning you can't put off addressing grievances like land and rights just because the preferred political system isn't in place yet. A fundamental clash of priorities.
So, wrapping this up, we've gone from John Quincy Adams's clear, maybe idealistic vision to the really messy, complex, sometimes shadowy realities of 2025. Managing monsters, soft empires, propaganda loops.
Yeah, exploring how monsters get defined, how they're used, and the ripple effects, often unintended, of trying to shape what other countries do.
It's this constant push and pull, isn't it? Between that Adams ideal and the modern interventionist reality. And the 2025 remix leaves us with a pretty dark thought.
Which is?
That maybe America isn't liberating anyone anymore. We're just playing God in the shadows, balancing chaos with control. And the chilling part, the monsters we destroy are the ones we design to justify our presence.
Wow. The empire doesn't wear boots anymore. It wears AirPods.
Yeah.
And it never stopped searching. It just got better at finding.
That's definitely something to mull over. What does that mean for us as citizens trying to stay informed when the whole game seems to have changed so much? A lot to think about there.